Well, it's wonderful to see all of you here this morning. I want to welcome you. I want to reaffirm the breadth of the ideas, the perspectives that we have represented in this room, and I certainly look forward to hearing from you today.
I'd like to introduce our speakers as they come up. First, we have the Honorable Mayor Eric Garcetti, who is the 42nd Mayor of Los Angeles and is the leader of a groundbreaking initiative just announced to provide housing quickly for some of the homeless people in the city of Los Angeles. And we're all looking forward to hearing more about that and to seeing it succeed. Next we have LA County Supervisor Mark Ridley-Thomas. He's been on the Board of Supervisors for a decade and is chairman of the board and has been a leader in county efforts to increase funding and increase attention and increase collaboration to help house homeless people and provide needed services. The Honorable Mark Ridley-Thomas. And finally, we have Elise Buick, who is the President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and she is the first woman in that role. And she is a well-known community advocate and has long provided a voice for the most vulnerable neighbors of ours in Los Angeles, homeless military veterans, mentally ill, low income, and so we welcome her. Thank you. And we're going to open with Mayor Garcetti. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. Give Sandy a round of applause for her incredible voice and work. I was told 15 minutes. I'm going to put my timer here, too, just so I can try to be respectful. I have so much to say in a very short amount of time, but let me just say how overjoyed I am to be back on this campus and in this room. My first job after graduate school was teaching here, and when I got elected to the city council, I kind of put together that I realized when I was a professor, I had all the time in the world to think about things, but no power to directly affect things. Then I became a council member, elected official. I had all this power to directly affect things, but I had no time to think. And I hope this room can be a coming together of both of those, the very best of what academia can bring and the power of what we as individuals engaged in the community in our work and as elected officials can do as well. And it's a privilege to be in a room of folks that are committed to this fight with us. When I ran for mayor, I remember an LA Times reporter coming to me, when I said back then, we will end homelessness. That needs to be our aspiration in Los Angeles. And he said, end homelessness. I said, yes, we are not called here to address or to reduce homelessness. We are called to end homelessness. That should and must be the goal for all of us in this city here today, because this is the greatest moral and humanitarian crisis of our time. I'm going to speak a little quicker than I usually enjoy doing because I want to get through all the substance of this, so excuse me, but let me walk back a little bit history. How did we get here? This crisis has been decades in the making. We can think about the last time we saw this level of encampments in Los Angeles. It was after World War II. As GIs came back, and Westlake Park, which was later renamed MacArthur Park, was filled with veterans who had no place to live. They had worn our nation's uniform, but they wound up on the streets of LA. In the 1960s, the residential hotels that we had downtown that had been there literally since the beginning of the 1900s began to close down. They were falling into disrepair, and people said it was cheaper to shut them down than to repair it. And we lost tens of thousands of options for people who were living downtown. We saw a state cut back on mental health care, and in 1981, President Reagan ended the federal government's role in providing services to the mentally ill. A couple years later, a study showed that 30% of people on the streets were struggling with mental health challenges. And during that same era, the federal government opted to deinstitutionalize America, which was code for emptying mental health facilities nationwide. And the 1980s was the last time I think that we will see like where we are right now, where a nation awoke to the crisis of homelessness. Here in California, the asylum population dropped more than 500,000 patients to just over 100,000. 5/6 of people were gone. And the promise of neighborhood clinics and community clinics never realized, an echo of what we see today with our criminal justice reforms that have been well-intended but not adequately addressed. At the same time, back then, federal programs for the poor were reduced by $57 billion. Virtually no public housing was constructed in this nation in the 1980s. Meanwhile, our healthcare system was falling apart, and by the 1990s, 2.7 million people in LA County had no healthcare. People often faced an impossible choice of paying for healthcare or for their rent. And it's no surprise that our cities and our counties' homelessness population skyrocketed. In the 2000s, we saw the worst recession of our lifetime. And ironically, as we came out of a recession, which should have been economic prosperity for more, we had failed in an infrastructure need to build adequate housing. So all the jobs that roared back here pushed people out or one level down into their housing and people at the bottom out onto the streets because that $1,000 or $1,200 a month apartment simply didn't exist anymore. Today, we're mired in the longest war in American history. Veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, more of them in Los Angeles than anywhere else in America, are returning in droves, many struggling with PTSD. Drugs on the street have never been cheaper or stronger. Our foster care system still has too many young people who wind up in jail or on the streets 2 or 3 years after they emancipate. And as I mentioned, our criminal justice reforms, which I think we all agree on the goal of, the savings haven't materialized in Mark or my pockets. To be able to spend on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, or in the first 2 or 3 hours that someone's released from incarceration, to catch them before they're living on the street, sometimes addicted, sometimes being preyed on, or themselves committing criminal behavior. So decades of bad decisions aren't just made, they pile up. And they result in sidewalks that in the city of LA now means that 25,000 Angelinos call the sidewalks home. I've been working to end this crisis my whole life, since 30-something years ago as a 14-year-old volunteer on Skid Row. I used to go there every month. And I think if the 47-year-old Eric Garcetti could talk to that 14-year-old Eric Garcetti, he would tell him, you don't know what's coming. It's actually going to get worse. And I think that 14-year-old wouldn't believe him. 12 years ago, when I was on the city council, I fought for and wrote the original Measure H, which would have been a $1 billion housing bond to provide safe, clean, affordable housing and homelessness prevention. And unfortunately, we only got a 63, I think, or 64% vote. In any other democracy, that would have been a mandate. In California, it fails. In the first few months of my time as mayor, I accepted Michelle Obama's request of mayors to end homelessness among veterans. I'm a veteran myself. I saw here that since Tom Bradley, the city of LA, while the county does remarkable work, hadn't stood up a veterans office. And so we did that, even though we were a couple years behind other mayors and had more homeless veterans than anywhere in America, because I know that we needed to push ourselves. If we don't know what we're reaching for, we can't get there. If we can't see the point on the horizon, we will never arrive there. We set that goal at a time when there was 6,000 veterans that were on the street. No, sorry, there was 2,600 veterans on the street at that time. Since then, we have housed more veterans than anywhere in America. Many social workers that have graduated from this university were a part of that. We have now housed 8,400 veterans, not only meeting, but way surpassing the goal numerically of what we set. To put that in context, that's more than Houston, Phoenix, New Orleans, and Salt Lake City did combined. And yet still, we have 2,500 veterans on our street. It's important to me that Los Angeles not only support the people, I'm sorry, it was 6,200 veterans that were there, so we cut it by 2/3. It's very important to me that people of Los Angeles not only support the people that are right in front of us, but we must anticipate the needs of people who are not yet on the streets today. We have to look at those structural drivers, because when people say, are we failing? Absolutely. I own that. We all should own that. But are we succeeding? Absolutely. We are housing more people more quickly than we ever have. How do we live with that contradiction? That we have housed more people. In fact, I've housed in Los Angeles in the city, together with the county, the city of LA has housed as many people as were homeless when I started as your mayor 4.5 years ago. So that's success, but we're up 40% net. That's failure, because 140% equivalent of new people, not person for person, are on the streets today. So how are hardworking families supposed to stay afloat when we looked at the beginning of this work when the national minimum wage was $7.25 an hour? Well, one way was by trying to raise incomes, and we did that. And the county did that, and now the state has done that. $1.8 billion has been returned to the pockets of Angelinos just in 3 or 4 years. It's still not adequate, but it is more than what they had before. Nearly 100,000 people are released from jail or prison every 5 years into the city of Los Angeles. Let that number sink in. 100,000 people, 100,000 people, the size of a decent-sized American city, are released every 5 years into the city of Los Angeles. More than 1/3 have no place to go. They write on their forms either the shelter they're going to or it's blank because they're homeless. So about 37,000 people are being released every 5 years into the city on top of the work that we're doing to get the 25,000 who are living on the streets today somewhere. We stood up an Office of Reentry in the city of LA for the first time since Tom Bradley. We brought home $6 million from Washington in 2015 to start LA Rise, a program that's already connected more than 1,000 formerly incarcerated and formerly homeless individuals to employment. We know that in California, if you are if you are released from prison, you have a more than 2/3 chance of going back to prison. But with this program that we've had a 1.4% recidivism rate. This works. It's what we need more of and we need to see. But we have to now sit down. I'm going to be sitting down with the sheriff, looking at our state officials, and figure out a better pathway for the moment that people are released so that the street isn't their option, but some healing, whether it's meaning anti-addiction programs while they're incarcerated or when they get to a street for the first time out from behind bars, they have a job training program or something else helping them. We looked at housing in general. I set a goal of 100,000 units of housing because home ownership was out of reach at its lowest rate since World War II, and rents are too high. And we are not only going to meet but surpass the goal of 100,000 housing units built in 8 years, but it's still not enough. The city of Los Angeles isn't an island. We are part of a much larger housing market, and we need other cities to step up too. We fought for a linkage fee to finally have the dream that Measure H and other things, the original Measure H, would have given us of an ongoing source of funding to build more affordable housing. And thanks to the City Council, we passed it so that we'll have every year $100 million to subsidize $400 to $500 million of affordable housing. I have 5 minutes left and 2/3 of my speech left, So that kind of lays the backdrop. Where are we today? I think a couple trends are very heartening. I know our hearts have never ached as much as they do, but I would also say that our hearts have never been as big as they are. Voters passed not just one, but 2 measures. People are saying, what is happening? Where are my dollars? Measure H dollars just started flowing October 1st. You put out the jobs, and the county and LAHSA and service providers are hiring more than 1,000 people, many probably in this room. Every time we do a jobs fair, we're overwhelmed by how many Angelenos, even in a tight job market, say, I want this mission-driven work and I want to be part of the solution. We're seeing the City Council pledge to build units in every single city council district for Measure HHH. Neighborhood councils now have 44 of them with homeless liaisons who are actually looking at siting and putting that down. On Monday, I announced a program called A Bridge Home. Right now, we see services coming. Not enough, we can always use more, but the days of only 25 outreach workers for 50,000 homeless people are over, and we'll quadruple the number of outreach workers. We should probably do that times 10 more, but we are starting to see the services come to the street. We have the long-term self-sufficiency model of HHH and getting people through transitional housing back on their feet. But there's an S in the middle that's missing between the street and the services and the self-sufficiency, which is shelter. And for a long time, we had a war between are you either pro-housing or pro-shelter. This isn't an either-or. It's a both-and question. It's like putting our feet on 3 accelerators at the same time. I had so many questions. Well, if you're expanding shelter, does that mean you're doing less housing? No. In fact, we even need more. Does that mean we're going to have less services? No. We need even more. It is the services, the shelter, and at the same time, the permanent supportive housing that will allow us to be able to finally see these numbers come down. I got the 2-minute sign, even though I had 3 minutes here, but all right. I'm always respectful of time. So, where is the cavalry? You all are the cavalry. I think that if we look at how we will end homelessness, how we will fulfill the promise that Mark and I, and let me just say briefly, even if I only have those minutes, I need to spend a moment on how changed the relationship between the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles is. Instead of blaming each other or seeing each other as competitors, Mark joined with us when we passed HHH. We joined with him passing H Phil Ansell, who is here, talks with our city counterparts. We have, for the first time, a coming together that we are one team, that a fire department can open up a sobering ambulance to pick up people who are overdosing, and instead of taking them to a county hospital to sober them up, put them back and rinse and repeat, they can drop them off at a county sobering center to get them connected with healing and long-term care. We see an ownership across the board now that is allowing us to finally see, I think, the end of the way. But a bridge home is this effort this year to stand up 1,500 more shelter beds linked closely to where we see encampments. The old model of housing, which has one permanent supportive housing, is a great model. But on the street, that may mean that as we rank who is most vulnerable and closest to death, and we have 2 housing units, 2 people out of that encampment of 20 get plucked out and put into that housing. That encampment remains with 18 folks there, and maybe next week 25. It doesn't work for breaking that, where people are being raped, where people are going through overdoses, where people have a false sense of security and are building intentional communities because it's the only community they have, but we have failed them. So the county has agreed to work with us, and the city has agreed to work with the county to focus on those areas that are full of encampments, and to not in a single day and then leaving, or a cleanup team or some cops, but to bring folks who will give long-term intentional work over a series of weeks, saying that 6 weeks from now, or 12 weeks from now, we will be clearing this encampment. But in the meantime, we do have a shelter right here, 24 hours, where partners and pets can go. Will there be services and storage? And we will never move somebody without the promise of that. But just as we did around Lawa, around Manchester Square, where we're going to finally bring a people mover into LAX, we worked that area for a number of months and had incredible outcomes to be able to make sure that people knew that finally that promise on the street wasn't just an empty promise, it was real. We will need your help. And one last thing for USC, because I got the time is up, is I hope that you will, as an academic institution, we're so excited to be working with you. And for everybody here from every other academic institution, we need you to help us build more, connect faster, and to know more. We are stumbling forward in the dark. 1 homeless count a year, and that's it. So everybody's got a theory in this room, the deepest practitioners, the academics, but this is LA, and we have USC, and we've got UCLA, and we've got Loyola Marymount, and we've got tons of institutions that should be tracking this. If this is the #1 concern for me, for Mark, for this city, and the biggest crisis we face, the only thing standing between, I believe, this city's greatness and the future, we should make sure that we know who the folks are that are out on the streets, track them more intelligently, put a model together of vulnerability, heat maps, poverty, focus our housing much more strategically, our jobs programs, the folks coming out of prison. We have to share data, use data, analyze it, and I hope USC, in its 2nd year, so then we come back for the 3rd convening, can help us stand that up. Whether it's at the county, at the city, with LASA, or all of us together, we need to research and assess cheaper building of housing. We need to engineer things better. We need to evaluate things better. We need to engage people better. And we have to make sure that we can look at what works. If we do that, I know that next year will be the first year we come back here and say, finally, the bad news is good news. Homelessness is down in Los Angeles, and we are the national model. And looking at you, I know that's what we will be doing next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. That was enlightening and encouraging, and I think it's a great way to get started. And now we are going to have the Honorable Mark Ridley-Thomas talk about the efforts of the county. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to be here, to be home in many respects. And I wish to say to Dean Marilyn Flynn, we thank you for your leadership. Let's give the Dean a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. To the balance of the academic corps here at the University of Southern California, we salute you. We acknowledge you. We recognize that this is a multidisciplinary pursuit by design. When President Nikias and I first sat down to talk about this idea, it was interesting that not shortly afterwards, I was getting calls from a range of academic officers, deans from respective schools saying, what did you say to the president? He's on fire. Give the president a big round of applause. Max Nikias. Mr. Mayor, we thank you for your remarks, your insights. This is a morning for us to take another look. The first convening, I was pleased to be here to make preliminary remarks. I'm here again by the grace of God to make additional remarks, and when you convene the next time, I hope that I will be able to offer more insights. Would you repeat after me? Everyone in. If you wouldn't be bashful about it, let me ask you to repeat yourselves again. Everyone in. Elise Buick is going to elucidate. After I'm here, I just wanted to get that out of my system. May I say, in a county as prosperous as Los Angeles, in a state as wealthy as California, homelessness is a moral crisis which will define our civic legacy in the eyes of future generations. Last year, as you know, the people of the county of Los Angeles opened their hearts and their wallets and said yes to Measure H. It was a stunning victory. Many of you were a part of it. The University of Southern California played a role in it, a very active role in it, in terms of its intellectual prowess, but its financial resources were made available, and it's a matter of public record, so I'm not disclosing anything that isn't known, and I'm proud of the fact that universities such as this help when they know help is needed. And it seems to me that the voters got that. It was unprecedented. For the first time since 1902, a revenue measure on an off-year ballot had been put forward and succeeded. I did say 1902, and it came in, it did come in at 70% affirmation. That's a big deal. And so what did Measure H afford us? It afforded us roughly $355 million a year, and it will allow us to scale up our compassionate and innovative strategies. The data shows that from July of last year until the end of last year, that is the first 6 months of the ramp up, many people were aided. To be specific, some 7,200 people moved off the streets into shelter. Another 3,300 people secured stable and affordable housing. And the question is, how did we accomplish this? And these numbers are real, they are verifiable, they reflect the intensity of the work that is happening, that is unprecedented in many respects. But how did it happen? It happened through multiple interwoven strategies. Phil Ansell will unpack some of that a little later, but he led the effort to get us there, and we are delighted that Phil is here heading the county's initiative. Now, Measure H is an effort that is designed to fund coordinated street engagement teams. You heard a little bit about that, and that's what the people of this county want to see. They want to see concrete material that is tangible results pursuant to their investment of their resources. These are public dollars, therefore we must be transparent, accountable, and results-oriented. I want to say the following. These street engagement teams, they excite us because those encampments that have increased, the last data said that the encampments increased from 2016 to 2017 to roughly 22%, and so we have nurses, mental health clinicians, substance abuse counselors, and those with lived experience in teams that go out to these encampments, and they don't leave until something happens. They are multidisciplinary by design because it takes all that. And the fundamental thing that they are seeking to do is establish trust, and then they bring their trained experience to bear. The numbers that I shared with you earlier essentially mean that this is working, and what we have to do is scale up, and that's why we are engaging with the level of force that is required. Measure H is funding different types of shelter, and you need to know what those are very quickly. Recuperative care beds, if you have an acute health issue, if you are too sick to be on the streets, but not sick enough to be in a regular hospital bed, these recuperative beds are what is being designed for you. They're called step-down, high-quality care, and we will build more of them because it's smart. It's very expensive to have homeless people on the streets. And so when we talk about our compassion that drives Measure H, that drove Measure H, is not only our compassion, but it is our sense of fiscal prudence. We are governed by a fiduciary responsibility, and to the extent that that is the case, we have to do more to spend our resources as effectively as possible. So recuperative beds. Then there are detox beds. If you have substance abuse issues, we have a place for you to go, and there'll be more for you. A third of the persons on the streets of Los Angeles suffer from some form of addiction. Then there are the bridge beds, and those are those beds that are for those who are exiting the jail system. More people than you want to think about. They are being released pursuant to criminal justice reform issues, and yet they're released with no place to go. And so they compound the problems in terms of social services, and it's a recipe for recidivism. Therefore, we need to be smart about how we are capturing this and deal with it. And let me say parenthetically, the largest mental health ward in the United States of America happens to be the county jails of Los Angeles. I say something is wrong with that picture, and we can do something about it, and Measure H will assist us in doing so. And so we have a range of wraparound supportive services that are coming into focus pursuant to Measure H. Measure H funded intensive services for some 1,300 tenants and new supportive housing units, and that's a good thing, and it's important. I see the 2-minute sign. I'm a Trojan, so I'm disciplined. Let's go do what we need to do. Well, we're ramping up the production of affordable housing. We say housing first, but not housing alone. You can't make this work if you just build new affordable housing. Services are required. The range of services that I articulated a moment ago are fundamentally important. In the 2nd Supervisorial District, the home of the University of Southern California, I might add, we'll see over the next 12 months as many as 50 new affordable housing units per month. That's doubling the number that we have done. This is verifiable. Don't believe me. Talk to the staff of the 2nd District. They know what they talk about. They just put me up here to say these things. But you will see concrete results, and we cannot do enough fast enough in the face of this crisis. Let me conclude by offering these insights. It was just a couple of weeks ago that I was in Memphis celebrating the commemorative of Dr. King's assassination. Imagine 50 years ago on April the 4th that such a tragedy struck our nation. Dr. King was at a turning point in his own witness publicly, and it was at the point of his assassination that I began to embrace the philosophy of nonviolence. And I think you will agree that involuntary poverty is a form of violence. And homelessness is the most extreme manifestation of involuntary poverty and institutionalized violence. And so as we look back on what Dr. King sought to achieve, we need to be clear that we all can agree that there is some substantial unfinished business related to justice, related to peace, related to human dignity. In the final analysis, our objective, our challenge, our charge is to make sure that those who occupy this space, this extraordinary space called Los Angeles, is one where we can call it a place of dignity, a place of purpose for every single human being, because that's why they were, in fact, created. The University of Southern California is playing a critically important role. It is documented today, and I thank you for the opportunity to share these insights with you.
Thank you very much, Mark, our Honorable Supervisor, Mark Ridley-Thomas. I know we are running a little long, and I will just be realistic and say we may not have time for questions because we are not going to shortchange our third speaker. And we are very fortunate today to have a full program where you will have time to ask questions and to have three such visionary leaders who are clearly morally and financially and intellectually committed to solving this problem in our region. So I want to thank them all. And I know Mayor Garcetti has to leave before too long for another engagement, so if he ducks out, that's why. And I would like to welcome Ms. Bjork to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So I was taught when I come to the university, I have to have my PowerPoint, right? Yeah. So I'm just thrilled to be here this morning, and I really want to salute USC because they have made the defining social issue of our time, ending homelessness, a true priority for every aspect of the university. So thank you, Dean Flynn, for having us here today and for convening this summit. And I'm pleased to tell the mayor we're already ahead of the game. We are partnering with the USC Price Center for Social Innovation with the generous support from the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation on a Homelessness Policy Research Institute. So we're already in motion. We will have 30 policymakers and researchers of universities all across this region, and we can leverage that brain power, and we'll have great things to say at next year's summit, so I wanted to let you know that. The other thing I just want to say is that we have been in this work for a decade, and I want to thank Andrea and the team because they are a funder who has been in this for the long term, and that's what this issue requires. And so we're not starting from scratch, so I hope you will take hope from that. I do remember when the city and the county didn't work together. I do remember a time when philanthropy wasn't aligned. I do remember a time when we didn't have our social service providers and our nonprofit housing developers at the capacity that they are, but we have done that hard work. We also have the business community aligned, so we should take great pride in what we have all accomplished together over the past decade, so give yourselves a round of applause. And I think as we look at collective impact, we've done a great job of getting institutions together. But as Supervisor Ridley-Thomas says, this issue requires that we have individuals involved. And we need everyone in throughout the county if we're going to get everyone in. And so I'm pleased to share with you today a campaign that we recently launched that really will do that and harness that. So I'm going to show you a video of our kickoff. This is a pivotal moment for our community. We have an unprecedented amount of funding to build housing, to fund services, and for the first time to allow us to focus on preventing families and individuals from falling into homelessness.
We are here today to say that no human being is invisible, that each and every person is created in the image of God and deserves to live in full dignity.
This is an army for good. an army that is fighting the injustices of poverty and the indignities of homelessness. To get everyone in? We need everyone in.
There's many faces, there's many people with different situations, and at times we're one crisis away from being there ourselves. These amazing women in Skid Row were able to navigate me through the system, but most importantly, I found permanent housing.
Resources change homelessness. It ends homelessness, one community at a time and one person at a time. I am in.
We are not the homeless capital of the world. We are the city of angels. We come here, we live here, we are in this community. I grew up down the street. All the outreach workers that are here today, we are all in and committed.
Supportive housing works. We have to encourage people that don't know about this movement, about the Count Me In movement. We got to encourage them to say, I'm in.
Thank you, voters. Through H and HHH, we now have a plan, we now have a partnership, we now have a city and a county that won't settle until people are fixing the streets instead of sleeping on the streets.
So what do you think? So I hope that you will all, I see Booker, my Twitter friend, follow us on Everyone In, if you're on Twitter, on social media. If you're like me and old school, go to our website, everyoneNLA.org. Hopefully you saw the big door out there. This is to create energy and momentum in the community and make neighborhoods all throughout the county of Los Angeles a part of this issue, because that is the only way we will solve this. So I'm going to walk quickly through what this campaign and movement is all about. The first is really breaking through stereotypes that really activate people's hearts and minds. I know we are all well steeped in this issue, but it does shock me continuously when I hear people say things like people want to be homeless, they're homeless because of the weather. There are a lot of stereotypes that we have to break down if we're really going to capture the hearts and minds. And the good news is there is a quiet majority out there that can be activated around this issue, and that's what we will do. There's 3 core goals around this effort. One is changing the narrative. We've done a lot of research in neighborhoods and neighborhood councils. People do not know that we know how to end homelessness. So we have to educate them and tell them and give them hope so they don't give up. We want to engage people in their local neighborhoods and frame this issue. When you hear 57,000 people sleep on the streets, it feels overwhelming. It feels daunting. You feel like there's nothing I can do to help change this. But when we break it down by neighborhood, we get to numbers that are manageable, and we find that neighborhood councils will say, I can make sure that those 500 people come in off the streets. I can help those 500 neighbors and get them into housing. We are also, we did a poll that shows, and this was quite shocking to us, that we asked people, will you support supportive housing with services for homeless individuals in your neighborhood? What do you think that the thumbs up was on that? Any guesses? 70% of people said they would support it. So while the media covers a lot about NIMBYs, there are actually 70% of YIMBYs out there, and that's what this campaign is about. We are flooding the airwaves and digital channels because that is the way that we can get to the biggest reach. But United Way cannot do this alone, and in fact, this campaign is not about United Way. It is about all of the companies and organizations that you represent, the County of Los Angeles, USC, faith-based leaders. If we can get everyone rallying around everyone in through social media, on neighborhood activations, that's the way that we're going to solve this issue. And the key will be how we do community engagement on the ground. It's not just about a communications and digital campaign. It is about engaging community by community. So what we're doing, and you can see on the slide, is a range of ways to engage people. Community pop-ups in neighborhoods all across the county, storytelling nights, which Marilyn Wells was a part of, the first one we did, and we're going to be doing more of those. Very powerful. We all know the power of story. Having people tour supportive housing and see what it is. The great news is that this housing exists in neighborhoods all throughout the county. And I remember our team, the great Tommy Newman's here, but we got called in to North Valley Neighborhood Council, who shall go unnamed. But when we took them on a tour of supportive housing, they said, wow, I like this type of housing. I see how it transforms people's lives. I could get behind this. And so it's just the hard work of how we're going to do that. And we also want to dial up on our annual home walk, which many of you, I see Claudia Andrade from SoCal Gas, they had 1,000 people walk last year. So that is another avenue that we can start to mainstream this issue. Finally, we do have a team, the great Mike Dennis from ELAC, many of you know, who is assembling a team of community organizers. And this is really to provide support and partnership to our elected officials who have the courage to want to site housing. So those organizers will be out really activating that quiet majority so that we can get to a yes on this type of housing being built. But as we go through today, we talk a lot about numbers. I just don't want us to forget why we do the work that we do. And Sandy talked about that a lot. And one of the stories that still inspires me to this day is a gentleman by the name of Ed Givens. And he very courageously has allowed us to publicly tell his story. And Ed was on the streets for decades, in front of that wall. He did not want to go into a program, but this is actually outside of a Salvation Army program center, and he picked that place because he felt safer there. And at the time, shelter wasn't the right solution for him. There wasn't a lot of options to get him indoors, and outreach workers worked with him. And I will say, and the supervisor referenced it, they didn't give up. And so here is a picture of Ed today. And so I want to salute the amazing outreach workers. They were at that launch of Everyone In for not giving up on the thousands of our neighbors who sleep on the streets each and every night, for not giving up on Ed. You can see, it has changed the course of his life, and he has regained his humanity and his dignity, and he is a neighbor I would be proud to have in my neighborhood. So let's remember Ed today as we talk about solutions, and let's remember it will take everyone in to get everyone in. Thank you.
All right, we are going to wrap up. I think I know we're late. The bad news is I don't get to ask my questions that I worked on, but the good news is that they answered them, and so I think they covered the ground so well.
Can I have one quick thing?
Yes, sure.
One action thing that I would have said in questions is right now the state of California has a $6 billion surplus. That surplus was put together by our hard work and this city and this county. And the local communities of California have asked, we met last week with the governor and legislative leaders, and there's a piece of legislation, AB 3171. Write that down. AB 3171, Phil Ting up in San Francisco has introduced it, to put $1.5 billion of that $6 billion on the streets of local communities today. We will match it dollar for dollar. That's easy for us to do because of H and HHH. But what it would do is give about $646 million to the county's cities this year. So please contact the governor, please contact your assembly members, please contact your state senators, and let's bring that home because we need their help too. Thank you.
And then that was one of the questions. What are we supposed to take away from this today? And so thank you for that. That is something concrete that we can do. And I know during the rest of this day that you will hear a lot that will motivate you and move you, and that you will all bring your own specific gifts and talents to bear on solving this problem. And everyone may have a different takeaway. For me, as a journalist who covered this issue for many, many years and never got over feeling discouraged and disheartened and heartbroken over what I saw, and discouraged over the lack of progress we made. And I found myself tearing up at the video. Everyone in. This is the first time we have seen this kind of collaboration and cooperation and commitment, and not only just from local, but as the mayor said, now from the state. So I think we should all feel very good about going forward and feel energized and committed. And I hope that you bring that spirit to the rest of the day. And I want to thank USC for doing this, and thank you all for being here. It's a wonderful, wonderful start to a new era in this area. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me pop back up to it. Appreciate you.